Over the last couple of days, I have farmed, leveled, and built every single Kuva weapon in Warframe, and in this video, we're gonna rank all of them in the ultimate Kuva tier list. I will tell you how each and every one of them works, how to mod them, which are the best of the best, and also what element best to use as a progenitor. Whew. This is gonna be a long one, so strap in, send love to all our generous channel members who help me keep the lights on, and now, let's jump right into it. Let's start alphabetical, which is quite fun because that means our first weapon for the day is an arc gun, that being the Kuva Weapon. The Kuva Weapon is an arc gun, which means you need a Gravimag system to be able to use it in on-foot missions. This thing is a slowly firing, fully auto grenade launcher that shoots explosive bullets with a 6-meter AoE, so that's pretty nice. Looking at the stats, we have a pretty good crit focus, but the status is also okay. And for the progenitor element, I would personally recommend Toxin, because that means you can build it into Corrosive against Grenier, you can go Viral against Corrupted, or Pure Toxin against Corpus, covering the biggest 3 factions. Since this is an arc gun, we are forced to build this into flat damage, because for any good damage over time build, we would have to have a faction mod, we would have to have an elementalist mod, and for arc guns, both of these are not available. This right here would be the build that you see in the background right now, and while this weapon is surely fun to play, it isn't really all that great, especially given the fact that later in this video we're gonna have a second arc gun which kind of does the same thing, just much better in my opinion. So as a whole, I would put it somewhere between B and C tier. Let's be generous, give it a B-. Oh yeah, and by the way, when Warframe 1999 comes out in 2-3 weeks I assume, then we'll also get Infested Lich weapons, and as soon as that update comes, I'm gonna sit down and work on an Infested weapon tier list, just like this one, so if you don't want to miss that day 1 on release, then you might want to consider maybe leaving the channel a sub. Welcome to the crew! Up next, we have a shotgun, or a shotgun pistol to be more precise. I'm talking about the Kuva Brak. I don't know about you, but I'm always a little bit suspicious when we get secondary weapons, since they tend to be a bit on the weaker side of things. However, the Kuva Brak hits like an absolute truck. This thing features solid damage, a great crit chance, and a fire rate of 5, which pretty much means it shoots as fast as you can click. All in all, performance-wise, I was positively surprised here. However, and that is very important to know, while this thing is very deadly close up, as soon as the enemy's further than 5 meters away, it's kinda like you're shooting with cotton candy. This shotgun right here, more than any other, really wants you to get up close and cozy with your foes. As a progenitor element, I personally again would recommend Toxin, so you can build Corrosive against Grenier, Pure Toxin against Corpus, and Viral against Corrupted, meaning you should go for flat damage and crit with this one, because, you know, on a secondary weapon, we don't have Hunter munitions, so slash for crit is not an option. This right here would be the build that you're seeing in the background, and in terms of tiers, I think B for Brak fits the build quite well. Next, let's talk about the once king of Kuva weapons, the Kuva Brahma. This thing has dominated the Warframe meta for so long that I think it's gotten 2 rounds of nerfs, and it's still somewhat viable. That tells you a lot about how strong this thing used to be. The Kuva Brahma is a bow that shoots explosive arrows that even John Rambo would be jealous of. It has great damage, great crit characteristics, and an AoE of 8.3 meters by default, which is definitely nothing to scoff at. However, as with most explosive weapons in the game right now, we have one big issue here, and that is that this thing absolutely eats up ammo while only having a very minuscule total ammo reserve. The Kuva Brahma absolutely forces you to either go for Vigilante supplies or even sniper ammo mutation in your Excellus slot. In terms of overall performance, there's really only one build that you can do on this, and this is Viral Hunter Munitions. Shoot some critical arrows at the enemies, get the slashes from Hunter Munitions, and then hope that the Viral will also hit them. As for the progenitor element, this is pretty straightforward. You either go cold or you go toxin, so you only need one elemental mod to get the Viral. However, as you also might see in the background footage, I unfortunately was dumb enough to get a heat one back in the day, which also means that my build right here has to be a little bit different from the modding, but I'm confident you're gonna figure out how to do it on a Toxin Progenitor one. As for total ranking, I think I'm also gonna rank this one as a B. However, with a frame that buffs up your crit and buffs up your damage, I think AoE weapons, more than most others, would benefit from it, so in this scenario, I might also give it an A. Oh, and just by the way, if you could maybe spare a little like, that would be super amazing because it helps the channel big time with the YouTube algorithm, so cheers so much for your support. Okay, quick disclaimer about the next weapon on the list. This one might have a teensy tiny little bit of bias because it is one of my absolute favorite weapons in the game. I'm talking about the Kuva Shakur. To explain it pretty simple, this is a semi-automatic rifle, it has a great reload animation, and it shoots explosive bullets that have a bit of an AoE whenever they impact. It features an absolute sky-high crit chance of 50% with a 2.3x multiplier, which is insane, but also the status chance of 27% is nothing to scoff at. What's more, it even has a unique trait of 50% additional damage on headshots, and this one is also ideally built into Viral Slash, but it has two different ways of how to achieve this Viral Slash. Let me explain. If you want to have a bit more of an AoE capability and you want to make use of that small explosion on impact, then I would suggest going for Hunter Munitions for your slash. You're definitely going to have enough crit for that anyway. But if you rather use it into a single target playstyle, then instead of Hunter Munitions, go with Internal Bleeding because the Kuva Shakur force procs impact on direct hits. And with Internal Bleeding, that makes your chance of a slash on direct hit much stronger as it would be compared to Hunter Munitions. However, since the impact proc is only on direct hit, this also unfortunately means that you lose out on your AoE slash capability. So you kinda gotta decide which side of the coin you want. As a progenitor, we go with Toxin or Cold again, so we can make Viral, which is perfect to be paired with Slash of course. This right here would be the build that you're seeing in the background, and I'm gonna put this one into A tier, but keep in mind I might be a bit biased, so I could also understand if other people see it as more of a B+ weapon. Up next, it gets a little bit more complicated. Now, we will talk about the Kuva Dragoon. The Kuva Dragoon really hurts me right in the heart because this gun looks so amazing, it feels amazing to play, but it doesn't really have the strength to back it up, unfortunately. The Kuva Dragoon is a shotgun with a charge mechanic where if you spam the fire, your bullets are going to be all over the place. However, if you charge it up, then they're going to be bundled and very precise. Also, they bounce off of walls, which is pretty cool. In terms of stats, we have decent crit values, but especially the crit chance could be a bit higher, which too goes for the status chance of only 9% per projectile. If you want to use this against armored enemies, then also you have to go for a Viral Hunter Munitions approach with a Toxin Progenitor. However, given that it's not so strong, it's kind of unfun to play it like that. This is why I decided to use it exclusively against Corpus, also with Toxin which bypasses their shields, because against their, let's say, more softer targets, this one can actually rack up a couple kills. And I also decided to pair it with the Dragoon specific augment for more in accelerant, which makes it that all our projectiles now bounce up to 4 times, which is incredibly fun to play in narrow corridors, as you also see in the background. It's good fun, but better don't take it against armored enemies. This right here is the build that you're seeing in the background. I think at the end of the day, even though it kind of hurts to say, I'm gonna have to put it into C tier. But I promise you, the next weapon on our list doesn't only feel strong, but also is. What is Uncle Blacky talking about, you might wonder? He is talking about the Kuva Grappler, the second and also last arc gun on today's list. Again, just like with the Kuva Yanga, you do need a Gravimax system to use it in on-foot missions, so if you like it, get one from Fortuna. And as I also teased in the Kuva Yanga part, this serves kind of the same role as the Kuva Yanga, but it does so much better. The Kuva Grappler is an absolute unit of a weapon. It's a handheld flak cannon with 4 separate barrels shooting explosive rounds full auto with a big AoE on impact of 9 meter. This thing is strong and it doesn't even try to hide it. As I also said with the Kuva Yanga, since arc guns don't have access to Hunter Munitions, don't have access to faction damage mods, and don't have access to Elementalist mods either, going for a damage over time build with this one is kind of not a thing. Instead, I again chose a Toxin Progenitor and went for flat damage, corrosive against Grineer, pure Toxin against Corpus, and viral against Corrupted, with this build that you're seeing in the background right here. And especially because of this big 9-meter AoE on impact, it also kind of works very well against armor targets because you're not only dealing corrosive against the target that you're directly hitting, but also to all the targets around, which means there's quite some armor strip going on, which leads to a decent crowd clearing capability. So, to make it short, the Kuva Grappler is an excellent Archon, even in Steel Path. I'm gonna put it into A tier, but maybe let's consider it A-. Okay, the next weapon on the list is probably the most nostalgic one that we have today because it is the Kuva version of the first shotgun many tenno out there built for themselves. Of course, I'm talking about the Kuva Heck. The Kuva Heck is a 4-barrel shotgun and it deals a lot of damage. I'm serious, this thing hits like an absolute truck, or maybe a truck that has a truck strapped on its back, which has a truck strapped on its back, which has a truck strapped on its back, because, you know, it's 4 barrels. The Kuva Heck features decent crit characteristics with 23% chance and 2.x multiplier, also a good status per projectile of 13.3%, and this is the special thing, you can use your alt fire button to fire off all 4 barrels at once, which, let me be clear, will turn any enemy in front of you into plasma. What's more is, the Heck also has access to a special Syndicate mod, that being Scattered Justice, which gives you 200% more multi-shot on top. Yes, you can combine that with Galvanized Hell for an absolute hell of multi-shot. And as a progenitor, I would also recommend Toxin. However, I built my Kuva Heck especially against Murmur, which is why I chose Electricity and modded it into Radiation. It's hard for me to say, but I want to be positive and put this one into A tier. One weapon that clearly won't go into A tier though is the next one on our list, and that would be the Kuva Hind. The Kuva Hind is the Kuva version of the Grineer standard assault rifle that you see in pretty much every mission out there, and it is very versatile, featuring a full auto, a 5-round burst, and a semi-automatic fire mode, each and every one of them having their own stats. Which fire mode you personally prefer is of course up to your preference, but I think it's in its sweet spot when it comes to crit chance and status chance balance when you use the 5-round burst, but there is unfortunately a problem. Because the Kuva Hind has a significant portion of impact damage and a good status chance on top, that means you're gonna see quite some impact status effects, so enemies are stumbling around, which makes it pretty difficult to land all 5 shots of your burst. Not gonna lie, this kind of stinks. So yeah, all in all, the Kuva Hind does look good on paper, and it's certainly not a bad weapon, but if you want to get the most damage out of it, then unfortunately you also have to play it in a viral hunter munitions playstyle like so many other weapons out there, and other weapons, also other weapons on today's list, just do that much better. This right here is my build, and I might be a bit harsh with the ranking, but I think we're gonna put it into C tier because viral hunter munitions assault rifles are the absolute most common thing in the game, and if you want to stand out in that category, then you gotta be special in some way, and the Kuva Hind just kinda isn't. Let's go on to the next one. Next we have the Kuva Carrack, and to make it short, it's a good weapon, not gonna lie. It is your standard, super generic, fully automatic assault rifle, 70-round magazine, good fire rate, but if that sounds kind of meh, then don't be confused because the performance of the Kuva Carrack is actually pretty darn good. From the stats, it looks very similar to the Kuva Hind, but in practice, it feels so much stronger. And I personally would suggest going for a Toxin Progenitor so you could play it into Viral Hunter munitions, but because we saw that a lot today, and we're gonna see it even more, I decided to build it into Pure Corrosive to showcase it. My Kuva Carrack is really darn old. I got it back in the day, I don't know, years ago when the Kuva weapons were released, and it has a Heat Progenitor, meaning that the build that you're seeing right here is a little bit different than it would be if you had a Toxin one. But anyway, as you also see in the background, the performance is really good. I like this weapon, I recommend this weapon, and we're gonna put it into A tier. But we still have very good ones on the list too. For example, the next one, that being the Kuva Comb. The Kuva Comb is not only one of the best Kuva shotguns, but one of the best shotguns in the entire game. It is absolutely crazy. Let me explain. The Kuva Comb is a fully automatic shotgun with a spool-up mechanic, meaning you have to hold down the trigger for a little bit before it reaches its maximum fire rate and also its maximum multi-shot. It features some semi-decent crit stats, not amazing but good enough to build for it, and a sky-high 90% base status chance. This thing is gonna light your enemies up with status effects like they are a Christmas tree. In terms of its base damage, it has a really big weight on slash, so as a progenitor, I went for toxin and built it in a way that I go for viral and for slash at the same time, making this weapon a really great one for all those players out there who find it too troublesome to switch between weapons for viral priming and just want the viral and the slash both on one gun. However, you ideally want to make sure that your toxin progenitor percentage is relatively low. Like, you don't want to have 60% toxin, you want to have the toxin a little bit lower to make sure that the viral at the end will not massively outweigh your slash percentage. This, by the way, is also why in my build right here, I only used a rank 0 Frigid Blast. So, time to put it on the list, and for me, this one is a clear A or even A+, just shy of that S rank. But you know which weapon will never make it to S rank? Yeah, that's right, the Kuva Kraken. This thing is easily the worst Kuva pistol out of all of them. And remember, we haven't even talked about the Seer, so that's telling quite something. The Kuva Kraken is a burst fire pistol which shoots 3-round bursts, but it also has an alternative fire mode where it mag dumps everything that is still loaded in one gigantic rapid fire burst, but as you also see in the background right here, you would be lucky to hit the broadside of a barn with that thing. So how about we completely ignore that the alt fire exists? As for its normal fire, the stats are kind of meh, okay crit, status chance pretty good, but then on the other hand, why would you want to use a high status chance 3-round pistol? In my testing, I found out that the best way to get at least some damage out of it in Steel Path would be to go for Hemorrhage, and by that, turn your impact procs into slashes because it has a big weight on the impact damage. But then again, the viral that I modded onto it was competing with the impact procs, and it's just all in all not a really good weapon. I cannot in good faith recommend getting this, and to keep it short, we're gonna put it into D tier next. But now that we talked about the worst Kuva pistol in the game, let's talk about the best Kuva pistol in the game, hell, maybe even the best pistol in the game overall. I'm talking about the one and only Kuva Nukor. This thing might look small, but it is an absolute unit. The Kuva Nukor is a beam pistol that shoots out a laser beam towards an enemy, then it's also going to create a chain of arcing beams that will hit enemies near that target, meaning you have some decent AoE capability as well. Now, when we look at the stats, we see that we have a crazy high status chance of 50% by default with a fire rate of 10, meaning this thing is going to create status effects like no other, which is also the reason why this one counts pretty much as the best primer in the game. However, don't disregard the Kuva Nukor as just a status primer, because this little thing also has the ability to hit like a truck given one specific external buff. See, the Kuva Nukor has a crazy crit multiplier of 5x, but only features a 7% crit chance. In other words, it's not really worth it to build for a crit. However, if you have an external buff that gives you a flat crit chance bonus, like for example Arcane Avenger with plus 45%, this would increase your 7% crit chance to 52%. So if you use Arcane Avenger, that all of a sudden means your crits hit like absolute trucks, not only against your primary target, but also against all their friends around them. So how would you build it? If you want to use it primarily as a status primer and not as a damage dealer, I would recommend going for Magnetic Progenitor Element and use this build right here, at least that's the one that I'm using for priming. And if you want to go for damage, then go for Pure Heat, both as your Progenitor Element as also in your build. This right here is my personal damage dealer build, and believe me, it is extremely strong and incredibly good. If there's one gun out of this entire list that you should absolutely get, then it's the Kuva Nukor, definite S tier, more than deserving of it. Up next, we have another AoE weapon, this one being the Kuva Ogress, but in comparison to all the other AoE weapons, this one is a bit more of a special snowflake. At first glance, the Kuva Ogress is just a rocket launcher. However, looking at the stats, we see that we pretty much don't have crit at all, so we cannot go for Hunter Munitions here, and also the radial attack doesn't deal enough slash to go for slash just with pure status chance. What we're doing here is, we want to make sure to have a heat progenitor element and combine it with the Ogress specific mod Nightwatch Napalm. what this mod does is, whenever you create an explosion, then in the AoE of that explosion, for 6 seconds, you're going to continue to inflict even more heat status effects, which, as you also see in the background right here, leads to crazy amounts of heat procs. This is what's going to trickle down the enemy's health and not the slash DOT. When it comes to the build, unfortunately I accidentally created my own Ogress with a toxic progenitor, meaning I had to build it into viral heat. So, that's the build that I'm using right here, but it's not optimal. And one last thing that I also wanted to mention here is that the Kuva Ogress is great for frames like Protea, who use the heat inherit mechanic for their abilities because of the fact that you're not only inflicting heat on direct hit, but for 6 more seconds in an AoE. In terms of ranking it, I'm gonna be honest, I find it a bit difficult to say because of the fact that I have the wrong progenitor and I cannot see the full potential in practical gameplay myself. So I think had I used a heat progenitor, I would probably even put it in A, especially if you get a little bit of external help. But as it is right here, I would put it in B. Just gotta mention, it is a pretty good performance though. Up next, we have the Kuva Quartak, which is an assault rifle. It has 2 fire modes and 4 barrels. The Grenier really have something for weapons with 4 barrels, don't they? If you fire it from the hip, it's fully automatic, and if you zoom in, it shoots all 4 barrels at the same time. It calls it a burst fire mode, but really it feels more like a semi-automatic because it just fires 4 bullets simultaneously instead of a burst. But all in all, it's a pretty darn strong weapon when it comes to damage numbers because of its really great crit performance combined with good status, so this is an ideal candidate to, again, say it with me, be built into viral hunter munitions. Give it a toxin progenitor, build it into viral like I did right here, and the hunter munition slashes are gonna hit like an absolute truck, or at least they will as soon as you have the stacks from your primary merciless up. Until that point, it's gonna be a bit weak, but don't worry, you're gonna get there. When it comes to ranking the Kuva Quartak, it's a bit difficult for me, because when it comes to the pure damage performance itself, like the pure damage numbers and everything, the slashes are pretty good, and I would say it's probably an A- even. However, the fact that you can't switch between the 2 fire modes, but they automatically switch depending on whether you're zoomed in or not, this, for me personally, was really clunky to play, and I didn't like it at all. So I'm gonna say, if this mechanic doesn't bother you, it's an A tier, really a good weapon. If it does though, then it's probably not really worth getting because, as I said previously, there are a lot of good viral hunter munitions weapons in the game. You don't need to have specifically the Kuva Quartak. Alright, the next gun on our list is the living meme. It is the almighty Kuva Seer. Now, let me be completely real with you here. I haven't had this thing before grinding for this tier list, and I was completely expecting to hate it, put it into D tier together with the Kuva Kraken, and then move on. However, I was really positively surprised by this pistol. I know, let me explain. The Kuva Seer is a slowly firing, hard-hitting single-shot pistol. It has decent crit characteristics, really good status chance. It also has a little bit of an AoE, just like the Kuva Shakur, on impact. Combine that with the good status chance, and that means with this AoE, it already has a decent amount of corrosive armor stripping to it, which is cool. When it comes to modding it, I went again with the Toxin Progenitor, but I didn't go into Viral Slash here because it being a pistol, it doesn't have access to Hunter munitions, and also the slash portion of our base damage is not high enough to get standard slashes out of it. That's why the Kuva Seer kind of forces you to go into flat corrosive damage against Grenier, and as you also see right here, it actually performs really darn well. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I've hit headshots for over 1 million against level 180 Steel Path heavy gunners. That is surely nothing to scoff at. Overall, from the damage itself, I would actually rank it in A tier, but given the fact that Warframe is kind of a horde shooter, it is not meta, so putting it in A tier would definitely be overrating it, but I think B tier would be a comfortable home for this year. The next weapon is a very special one, because it is the only melee weapon on today's list, meaning I'm of course talking about the Kuva Shield Egg. The Kuva Shield Egg is absolutely crazy. It is really strong crit, strong base damage, strong status, it really has it all, plus a 3-meter range because it is a long hammer. Now, in terms of how to play it, you would go with the Crush-In Ruin stance because with the block combo, it has a very fast spin to win attack, meaning you hit a lot of enemies. Combine that, ideally, with an electric progenitor and melee influence, and I think you can see where that goes. Your electricity triggers melee influence is going to spread your status effects all over the place, and that happens quite a lot because you have a long range and a fast attack speed. It's a great and very deadly combination. The way that I imagine it to be the best it can be would be with the electricity progenitor and then mod blast onto it. Because you're going to spread the blast so much with melee influence, it's going to lead to a crazy chain reaction where just the entire room around you explodes. It's crazy. It was a lot of fun to play, even though I accidentally got a heat progenitor and had to swap my build a little bit. In an ideal case scenario, you would use this build right here, but you would already have an electricity progenitor, meaning you would go and replace Voltaic Strike either with base damage or with even more range. Absolutely no doubt, the Kuva Shield Egg is going to be our second S-tier weapon for today. It is just incredibly strong and really stands out among the crowd. Alright, so the next weapon is a really complex one that I even have a full solo video on, that being the Kuva Sobek. The reason why the Kuva Sobek is so complex is because it is the only weapon on today's list, maybe even the only weapon in the game, I'm not completely sure, to have 3 unique personal augment mods, those being Shattering Justice, Acid Shells, and Clip Delegation. Now, before we talk about anything else, I think Shattering Justice isn't really worth it, and we're not going to talk about it today. Clip Delegation, though, is an absolute must because it easily gives you another plus 225% multi-shot on top of your standard multi-shot mod, so that is very, very strong. As for Acid Shells, we're not going to talk too much about that today because it is only used in very specific niche builds. For example, if you use the Kuva Sobek in the hands of a Saren using Toxic Lash, there are some interactions right there, but if you want to know more about that, then you probably want to watch my solo Kuva Sobek guide. I kind of go a little bit too far for this tier list video to break all of that down. So let's first talk about the weapon itself. The Kuva Sobek is a standard shotgun. Decent crit, decent status, decent damage, decent everything, really. I personally would again recommend a Toxin Progenitor, however, I personally got a Heat one because I wanted to build it against Murmur, so I went into Radiation. This right here is the build that I'm using, and yeah, it's just overall a good shotgun. A B-tier weapon for me personally in a standard day-to-day mission. However, if you use it in the hands of a Saren with Acid Shells, then this is going to be an absolute S-tier, no doubt, because, you know, Saren breaks every weapon that she uses, specifically this one. Next, the Kuva Tonkor. Let me be real with you, I really want to love this weapon, but I still kinda sorta can't. The Kuva Tonkor is pretty much the definition of a grenade launcher type weapon. It looks like one, it plays like one, and it does a lot of damage. With a 30% crit chance and a 2.5x multiplier, this is your standard viral hunter munitions gun, but compared to the other AoE weapons on today's list, the Kuva Tonkor doesn't have as much of a problem with ammo sustain because it gets a bigger ammo reserve, and if you're playing this in missions with high enemy density and a lot of ammo drops, then you might even get away without an ammo mutation mod in the Exilus, which is definitely nothing to scoff at. This right here is the build that I'm using, of course with Toxin Progenitor, but also I feel that the Kuva Tonkor really needs some more additional buffs, you know, more damage, more crit, to really hit home those slashes in Steel Path. All in all, without external buffs, I would give this one probably a C tier. Up next, we have an Akimbo weapon, those being the Kuva Twin Stubbers, and they really positively surprised me. Now, because this is a pistol type weapon, we don't get access to hunter munitions. If we wanted to go for slash, we would have to use Hemorrhage, and that kind of doesn't work here. So direct elemental damage it is. The Kuva Twin Stubbers feature good crit characteristics, a nice status chance, and overall also some decent damage given the high fire rate of 10 bullets per second. I personally went with a Toxin Progenitor so that I can go Corrosive against Grineer, Toxin against Corpus, and Viral against Corrupted, like with so many other weapons on today's list already. And with this build right here, I decided to simply showcase it against Corpus for once, because I think we've seen enough Grineer for today, let's be real. But I also tested it against Grineer, building into flat Corrosive, and it could absolutely hold its own. So, long story short, the Kuva Twin Stubbers are an A. I really like them. And last, but definitely not least, we have also a former meta king, a very iconic weapon, this being the Kuva Tsar. Now, the Kuva Tsar really sticks out because this is a literal 18th century naval ship cannon fired from your hip. It has two fire modes, the first one being an explosive cannonball, which is also mainly the one that you're going to use, and the second one is a shotgun blast with good performance, but you know, if you wanted to play shotgun, you would not go for the Kuva Tsar, let's be real here. In terms of stats, this one is very similar to the Kuva Tonker. Good crit, a bit more status, a bit less damage, and overall you want to build it with a Toxin Progenitor into Viral Hunter munitions, yada yada yada, like you do with so many other AoE weapons in the game. But just like with other AoE weapons in the game, after 2 rounds of nerfs it just needs some external help and buffing to be viable, especially because it, like the Kuva Brahma from the beginning of the video, extremely struggles with ammo sustain, so you gotta pick your shots wisely and go for rifle ammo mutation, otherwise you're not gonna be happy. On today's list, weapons are rated for what they are in and of themselves, and that means it goes right into C tier together with its brother, the Kuva Tonker. Whew! That's all 20 Kuva weapons ranked. This right here would be the total tier list, and if it makes you mad because your favorite Kuva weapon is way lower than expected, then let me know in the comments down below how you would change the ranking according to your preference. And if you now also want to know how to farm all these bad boys, then don't miss my full Kuva Lich farming guide right here. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nostlinux Gaming, Turtlepeer, Lycon Shepherd, Ondakanio2, Pepperwolf, Streamjet21, Synapking 5000, Mihawk HE, Yagis, Hoke Hunter, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.